Imagine finding, I don't know, a message in a bottle, but instead of from a castaway, it's a glimpse of the year 3906, like 2,000 years from now.
Yeah, it sounds like pure science fiction, doesn't it? But that's sort of the core of our deep dive today. We're looking at Paul Amadeus Dienach.
Right, Dienach. Born 1889, a Swiss guy, taught German and Austrian languages. Pretty ordinary on the surface, you know? Lived a quiet life.
Totally unassuming. But he left behind this diary, which eventually got published in the 70s as the Dienach Prophecy. And it caused quite a stir. Still does, really.
Okay, so let's get into how this whole thing started. The key seems to be May 1921. Dienach was 32, teaching in Switzerland.
And he gets hit with encephalitis lethargica, sleeping sickness. Nasty stuff, linked to that big pandemic in the 1910s.
And it wasn't even his first bout with it, apparently. He'd had a milder case before.
Exactly. But this time, it knocked him out completely. He fell into a coma, a really deep one.
For how long?
A full year, 12 months out cold. He finally woke up in May 1922.
A whole year. And tragically, his mother, who'd been looking after him, she passed away while he was well asleep.
Imagine waking up to that. Just profound grief on top of everything else. It's awful.
But here's where it gets weird. Dienach claimed that while he was in that coma, something happened. Something so out there, he was afraid to tell anyone.
You can see why, right? He thought people would just say he was insane.
Definitely. So his health wasn't great after the encephalitis, and he ended up moving to Greece.
Yeah, seeking a better climate, I think. And it was there, realizing he was probably dying, he had tuberculosis by then, that he decided he had to write down whatever it was he experienced.
And that's the diary. But how'd it get out?
Well, in this kind of twist of fate, he gave the diary to one of his students in Greece, a young guy, 19 years old, named George Papahatsis.
His student. Why?
Dienach was teaching him German, and he gave him the diary, written in German, basically as a translation exercise, practice material.
Wow. And this student, Papahatsis, he wasn't just some random kid, right?
Not at all. He went on to become this really prominent legal scholar, even a university rector, a very respected figure.
So Papahatsis starts translating. What did he find?
Well, he spent the next 14 years on it. 14. And at first, a lot of it was, personal reflection, Dienach writing about his own life.
Including a love story. I read something about that.
Yes, a really central part, it seems. A very sad story about his childhood sweetheart, Anna. They were deeply in love, planning to marry.
But there's always a but in these stories.
Yeah. Her father wanted her to marry someone with more money for security. Anna loved Dienach, but then her mother got really sick.
Oh, no.
And on her deathbed, the mother basically begged Anna to do what her father wanted. So reluctantly, she married the other guy.
God, that's heartbreaking. Was she happy?
The diary suggests not at all, profoundly unhappy. And then just 2 years later, tragically, she died during a pregnancy.
Awful. And Dienach.
It crushed him, sent him into a really deep depression, according to the diary entries. It clearly haunted him.
Okay, so it starts as this personal, tragic diary. How does it morph into prophecies about the year 3906?
That's the incredible shift. Suddenly, mixed in with all the personal stuff, are these incredibly detailed accounts of the future. Specific years, months, even days mentioned.
So Papahatsis is translating this. What did he think?
Initially, he figured it was fiction. His teacher writing some kind of novel or imaginative story. Makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
But as he kept going, year after year, seeing the detail, the consistency, he started to change his mind. He actually became convinced it wasn't fiction, that he was translating a real account, a diary from the future.
That's a massive leap. A diary from the future. And this thing almost didn't survive, did it?
Almost lost entirely. During World War II, Papahatsis' home was occupied by the Greek military. They found the original diary, the German manuscript, and confiscated it.
Gone.
The original, yes. But luckily, Papahatsis had already finished his Greek translation. That survived.
Ew, close call. So after the war, what did he do with this translation? He couldn't just sit on it, could he?
He was cautious. He shared it, but only within certain circles. Theologians, theosophists, even Freemasons.
Freemasons? What did they make of it?
Well, according to the story, the Freemasons thought the content was just too significant, too potentially disruptive, maybe. They apparently decided to keep it under wraps. Secret.
For how long?
20 years. They supposedly held on to it, keeping it hidden.
20 years.
Mm-hmm.
What finally made Papahatsis decide to publish?
Despite a lot of pushback, apparently, especially from those who wanted it kept secret, he felt he had to get it out there. Sense of responsibility, maybe? So
Mm.
in 1973, he finally published it.
And boom, controversy.
Big time. It caused a huge debate in Europe. People basically fell into three camps. Those who totally believed it was a genuine prophecy, those who saw it as maybe a philosophical thought experiment about where humanity could be heading, and of course those who just dismissed it as a complete hoax.
Right. The usual reactions to something this
Right.
unusual. Okay, let's get to the core of it. What did Dienach say happened during that year in the coma?
Well, his account says it wasn't just blankness, not total unconsciousness. He described it as more like a semi-conscious state. He felt like he was aware of things happening around him, movement, but couldn't really see clearly.
Okay. And then,
And then suddenly he woke up, but in a place that was completely, utterly alien to him.
who did he see first? What was it like?
He saw two people nearby. Their clothes were strange, unfamiliar, and they spoke a language he couldn't understand at all, though he thought maybe it sounded a tiny bit like English, but very distorted.
And then someone spoke German.
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah.
An older man came up to him, spoke some broken German, told him he'd had a head injury, and then dropped the bombshell.
The year.
The year. The man told him it was 3906.
Wow. 3906. Nearly 2,000 years in the future. How did Dienach even process that?
Shock, disbelief, terror. He tried to get out of bed, saw his reflection, and didn't recognize himself. He looked like a younger man.
Younger. But he was only 32 when the coma started.
Right, but the reflection was apparently even younger than that. It totally freaked him out. He thought maybe he was dead.
Understandable. Did they confirm the year?
They did. The medical staff realized he was speaking this, to them, ancient language, and yeah, they confirmed it, 3906 AD.
So what did this future world look like to him? His first impressions?
Just mind-blowing for someone from 1921. He looked out a window and saw these incredibly tall buildings made of something like glass soaring up high and vehicles flying through the air.
Flying cars.
Pretty much. He just described it as beautiful, but also admitted he couldn't really comprehend the technology or how it all worked. It was just too different.
Okay, the million-dollar question. How did they explain him being there? A man from the past suddenly showing up?
Get ready for this. The doctors told him he was inhabiting the body of a physicist named Andreas Northam.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Northam had been in a fatal accident, a car crash, I think. His body was dying, but they managed to temporarily revive his brain function for a short time.
And Dienach's consciousness just jumped in.
That's what they told him. They said it was a known phenomenon in their time, though very rare. They actually had a term for it. Something like a dying person's soul traversing into another dying person's body.
Okay, that is seriously mind-bending.
Yeah.
Consciousness transfer.
Right. A lot to take in.
So what did Dienach want? Did he just accept this?
No way. His first instinct, totally understandably, was wanting to go back to his own time, his own body.
Makes sense.
He ended up staying in their hospital for about 12 days, recovering in Northam's body, and eventually he met with the leaders of their society. They called them the elders.
The government, basically.
Sort of, yeah. They questioned him, assessed the situation, and they also concluded that, yes, this impossible thing, a consciousness transfer across millennia, had actually happened.
And these people, the inhabitants of 3906,
Mm-hmm.
they weren't quite human as we know it, were they? There was something different.
That's a crucial point. They didn't call themselves Homo sapiens. They identified as a distinct, evolved human species. Homo occidentalis novus. People of the Western New, basically. And the diary describes actual biological differences, changes in brain structure.
And something else, a new sense.
Yes. This is maybe the wildest part. They supposedly had developed a new sensory organ. They called it the Nibelvik.
Nibelvik, what did it do?
It's described as a kind of sixth sense, but way beyond that. A supercapacity. It allowed them to perceive dimensions or realities beyond our current five senses.
Wow.
And it gave them a direct connection to something they called the Sarmis. Dienach kind of equated this to the idea of the Akashic records, like a universal library of all knowledge and experience.
So they could perceive reality on a level we can't even imagine.
Exactly. And apparently they found it hard to understand how we, their ancestors, could even function without this sense. It was just fundamental to their existence.
How did this evolution happen? Was it gradual?
According to the diary, it was actually quite sudden in evolutionary terms and dangerous at first. There was a really high mortality rate initially when people started undergoing this change. It took centuries for it to stabilize biologically.
A risky upgrade then. So what kind of society did these Homo occidentalis novus build with these abilities?
Dienach describes a society that had really shifted its focus. Less about material wealth and competition, much more about spiritual growth, cooperation, altruism,
Yeah.
working for the common good.
Sounds utopian. How's it structured?
Well, everyone had to do a mandatory 2-year service period starting at 17. After that, your basic material needs, food, shelter, everything were just provided.
Provided by whom?
By the collective, essentially. The system was set up so people didn't have to worry about survival. It freed them up to pursue personal interests, art, science, whatever, or contribute voluntarily to society.
Logs.
No formal laws like ours, but they had 3 core principles everyone lived by. 1 was the mandatory service. 2 was regulated access to resources, basically preventing anyone from hoarding stuff.
Makes sense if needs are met. What was the third?
Population control. They kept the global population deliberately low, under 100,000 people worldwide and 3,906.
Only 100,000
Yeah.
globally.
Yeah. The idea was quality over quantity, perhaps. And while material wealth wasn't a big differentiator, there were disparities based on, intellectual and spiritual development. That was the wealth they valued.
And Dienach lived among them.
For a whole year, he learned their language, learned their history, which for him was still our future.
Okay, so let's talk about that history, our future. What were some of the big predictions he recorded?
The diary lays out a timeline, starting relatively soon, actually. Around 2150, it predicts the formal start of Mars colonization, building habitats, life support, the whole deal.
Mars colonization.
Yeah.
That's definitely on people's minds now.
Right. Then, by 2204, large-scale immigration to Mars supposedly begins. The population there grows significantly,
How about?
reaches about 20 million people, according to the account, but then disaster strikes.
Whoa.
In 2265, a massive natural catastrophe hits Mars, wipes out the entire colony, 20 million people gone.
Devastating. And what's happening on Earth at this time?
Earth is predicted to be facing the opposite problem: severe overpopulation, crisis levels.
So Mars fails, Earth is overcrowded. What comes next?
War. A terrible global war starting around 2309. Dienach uses the term deadly projectiles,
Which sounds a lot like...
nuclear weapons.
Right.
Although that term didn't exist in 1923 when he was writing. The description implies massive destruction, especially across Europe.
Any areas spared?
Interestingly, yes, Scandinavia and the Baltic countries are mentioned as being largely spared the worst of it, which might explain why the language Dienach heard in 3906 was described as a mix of Scandinavian languages and English.
A linguistic legacy of the conflict. So after this devastating war,
The world is basically in ruins for decades. It takes until 2396, almost 90 years later, for the fighting to finally stop and for a global federal government to be established.
stability at last.
Not quite. This first world government is apparently dominated by, power players and leads to more instability for over 100 years.
So when does real peace arrive?
Only when they change the rules for who gets to be in the world government. More than a century after 2396, it's mandated that it must be made up only of scientists, technologists, and humanitarians.
No politicians, no business leaders.
Explicitly excluded, according to the diary, and that change supposedly ushers in a millennium of peace and stability, leading right up to Dienach's time in 3906.
That's a radical idea for governance.
Oh.
Any other major shifts predicted?
A huge one around 2823, a fundamental change in the global economy. They move away from our current scarcity-based models
Kill what?
to something described as a global suitability-based model. It's a bit vague, but the result is supposedly a massive leap in technology and unprecedented material abundance for everyone.
Sounds great, but is there a catch?
There seems to be. This era of easy abundance leads to a rise in materialism, a focus on just stuff, and spiritual pursuits decline. The diary even suggests this leads to a drop in average human intelligence.
Prosperity making us dumber. That's
Right.
counterintuitive.
Maybe less challenged, less driven to push boundaries. It's an interesting thought. And it's during this period that the first signs of that evolutionary leap start appearing.
The Homo occidentalis novus emergence. How did that start?
People started experiencing these sudden deaths, but strangely, they often died with expressions of, bliss or happiness on their faces.
That's eerie.
Totally. It was later understood that these were the very first unstable instances of this brain evolution, the Nibelvik activating, essentially.
So they set up an institute to study this.
Yes, the Edelson Institute in Norway, dedicated to researching this, spiritual evolution. But the early research was dangerous. Many more deaths occurred among those studying it or experiencing it.
Until the breakthrough.
Exactly. September 7th, 30382. A researcher named Alexis Berkey has this experience, described as perceiving the Nibel arch, and he survives. He undergoes the transformation stably, becomes the first Homo occidentalis novus who makes it through the transition alive.
And after him.
No more deaths during the evolution. It's stabilized. And the period after 3382 is called the Golden Age.
Why golden?
Because the leaders of the world government increasingly come from this evolved group, the Homo occidentalis novus. Their enhanced understanding, their connection to the Sarmases, it made them uniquely suited to lead. They were even called creators.
Like gods among humans.
Almost, yeah, seen as having this deeper wisdom. So Dienach spends a year in this incredible future. Did he want to stay? It sounds like he adapted surprisingly well. He actually found happiness there. Even formed a close friendship with a woman named Sylvia.
Did he forget Anna?
The diary is clear he didn't forget her, but Sylvia represented a new, important connection for him in that future time.
And there was a significant moment with Sylvia. Something about a hill.
Yes, a really poignant scene. They took one of those flying vehicles to the exact same hill where Dienach had last parted ways with Anna back in his own time.
Wow. That must have been intense.
Incredibly. And while they were there, Sylvia placed a silver flower wreath on his head.
And that meant something.
It mirrored a promise Anna had made to him years before. It triggered this huge emotional release for Dienach. He felt the pain of Anna's loss finally easing, and he even wondered if Sylvia could be somehow Anna reincarnated.
Heavy stuff. What happened next?
Sylvia said something cryptic. "Time no longer walks, let's go back." They got back in the vehicle and returned.
And that was it. How did he physically get back to 1922?
That night, after returning from the hill, Dienach felt this overwhelming tiredness wash over him. He fell into a deep sleep.
And woke up.
Back in his own body. In May 1922, a year after the coma began, and he claimed that during that entire year he spent in 3906, he never felt tired, never slept until that very last day.
Never slept for a year.
According to him. Then, of course, he wrote it all down, gave the diary to paparazzi. There's some thought that the shock, this sort of jolt of returning, might have contributed to his declining health and death from TB later.
Plausible, maybe. And you mentioned the Mars prediction earlier.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Especially the part about the catastrophic failure and the difficulty of long-term self-sufficiency. It touches on current debates about resource availability, both here and potentially on other planets.
It really is an absolutely extraordinary story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whether you believe it literally or not, the claims are just staggering. Stretches everything we think we know about time, consciousness, humanity's future.
It really does. And even if you approach it with, a healthy amount of skepticism, which is probably wise, it forces you to think. Do any of these predictions resonate? Do they echo anxieties or hopes we have today? What seems completely outlandish?
Yeah, definitely food for thought, which I guess leads to the final question, really. If something like this, even a flawed or misinterpreted glimpse into a potential future, are possible, what does that imply? What responsibility does that put on us right here, right now?
Exactly. It makes you reflect on where we are heading, the choices we're making about technology, society, that balance between, say, material progress and maybe something deeper, more spiritual. Lots to mull over.